My name is Tom Walker and I hit the floor in front of my whole family on Christmas Eve, gravy on my shirt, my hip screaming, because my stepson Kyle shoved me away from the head of the table and said, "That seat belongs to my dad. Get out." For a second nobody breathed. Christmas lights blinked in the window. Forks hung in the air. I stared up at Kyle's half-smile and waited for my wife Linda to say my name like it mattered. She didn't. She grabbed napkins and started blotting the gravy off the hardwood, like the spill was the problem, not the man on the floor. That was the moment something in me went quiet. Not rage. Something colder. Something final. My name is Tom Walker and I hit the floor in front of my whole family on Christmas Eve, gravy on my shirt, my hip screaming, because my stepson Kyle shoved me away from the head of the table and said, "That seat belongs to my dad. Get out." For a second nobody breathed. Christmas lights blinked in the window. Forks hung in the air. I stared up at Kyle's half-smile and waited for my wife Linda to say my name like it mattered. She didn't. She grabbed napkins and started blotting the gravy off the hardwood like the spill was the problem, not the man on the floor. That was the moment something in me went quiet. Not rage. Something colder. Something final. I pushed myself up on one hand, the hardwood cold under my palm. My dignity burned hotter than my bruised hip. I looked at Linda, waiting for a word. A hand. Anything. She kept her eyes on the floor. In that blinking Christmas light silence, I understood something I'd refused to see for years. To them, I wasn't family. I was maintenance. The guy who fixed the sink. The guy who paid for the new cabinets. The guy who showed up and kept quiet and made everyone else comfortable. Kyle stood over me, breathing hard, chest puffed like he'd finally won something. Ray, his biological father, leaned back in my father's chair with a smirk that said he'd been waiting for this moment for years. Linda's sister Diane looked away. The kids stared. And I realized that nobody was going to defend me because nobody thought I was worth defending. So I stood, slow and steady, swallowing the pain, and I walked out into the Iowa cold without saying a single word. That chair wasn't just wood and fabric. It was the last thing my father left me that mattered. Old oak, worn armrests, a squeak in the back left leg that sounded like him clearing his throat. When he was dying, he'd sit in it by the window in hospice and watch the parking lot like he was waiting for someone to come get him. After the funeral, I couldn't sell it. Couldn't donate it. So I hauled it into my garage, tightened every joint, sanded it smooth, stained it walnut, and repatted the seat with my own hands. It took me 3 weekends. I did it because it felt like keeping a promise. When Linda and I got married, I brought that chair into her split level like it was a peace offering. Second marriage for both of us. Hers had ended badly. Mine had ended quietly. We were supposed to be building something new. For years, that chair sat at the head of her dining table. Not because I demanded it. Because that's where the person who hosts sits. That's how I was raised. And I'd been hosting more than anyone wanted to admit. 2 summers ago, I spent $11,000 of my retirement savings to redo Linda's kitchen. New cabinets. A farmhouse sink. Decent lighting. I did most of the labor myself, tile by tile, after work with my back screaming and my knees stiff. When it was done, Linda stood in the doorway and cried. She said, "I didn't know anyone would ever do something like this for me." I thought she meant it. I thought we were building something that would last. I was wrong. That kitchen was just another bill I paid to stay welcome in a house that would never be mine. I made it home a little after midnight, my hip throbbing, my shirt still smelling like turkey and shame. I didn't turn on the lights. Just sat in my recliner in the dark and stared at nothing. My phone buzzed twice. Linda. I let it ring. Then Kyle. I watched his name light up the screen and go dark. Around 2 a.m., I was still awake when my phone chimed with a sound I hadn't heard in years. A credit alert. The kind you only get when something bad has happened. My stomach dropped before I even opened it. The app was clear. My credit score had tanked. Not a small dip. A cliff. New inquiry. New account opened. My name attached to something I never signed. I sat up straight, heart pounding, and scrolled through the details. There it was. An $18,400 loan. Opened 8 months ago. First payment missed last month. Second payment missed this week. I stared at that number until my eyes burned. $18,000. That wasn't an accident. That was a plan. My phone started ringing again. Kyle. Then Linda. Then a number I didn't recognize with a Cedar Rapids area code. The calls came one after another like dominoes falling. I didn't answer. I just sat there in the cold glow of my phone, watching my whole life come apart in real time. By 6 a.m., I had 23 missed calls. Kyle's voicemails went from cocky to panicked to desperate. In the last one, he slipped. Called me Dad for the first time in years, then corrected himself fast. My throat tightened. All those years he couldn't give me that word. But the second the money dried up, his mouth reached for it like a reflex. I didn't call anyone back. I put on jeans and a flannel, laced up my work boots, and drove to the credit union before they opened. The parking lot was empty except for one car. A woman named Marcy met me at the door. She had kind eyes and a name tag clipped to her cardigan. She didn't waste time. She led me to a small office that smelled like coffee and old carpet and slid a folder across the desk. Inside was a loan application. Kyle's name. Linda's name. And mine, typed neatly under guarantor. My hand started shaking before I even saw the signature. Marcy turned her computer monitor toward me. There it was. A scanned document with my name signed at the bottom in black ink. Except it wasn't my signature. It was close. Someone had tried. But the rhythm was wrong. The letters were shaky. The T had a loop I'd never used. And then I saw it. The signature didn't say, Tom Walker. It said, Tommy Walker. I felt the blood drain from my face. Only my father ever called me Tommy. I haven't signed that name since I was a kid. Marcy asked quietly, who had access to your personal information? I stared at that forged signature and felt something crack inside me. My wife, I said. She nodded like she'd heard that before. Then she pulled out a single sheet of paper. A fraud affidavit. She explained it slow and clear. If I signed it, the credit union would open an investigation. Kyle's loan would be frozen. There could be criminal charges. My phone buzzed on the desk. Kyle again. I looked at Marcy and said, I'm not doing this out of anger. I'm doing this because my name actually means something. Then I signed it. Listen, I know some of you have been exactly where I'm standing right now. You've been the one who paid, who fixed, who covered, who kept quiet just to keep the peace. And maybe you're reading this and wondering if I'm doing the right thing. I need to hear from you. Because the hardest part isn't what happened. It's what comes next. If you've ever had to choose between your dignity and your family, drop a comment or hit subscribe. I'm not looking for an audience. I'm looking for people who understand what it costs to finally say no. I drove straight to Linda's house with the signed affidavit in my coat pocket and a knot in my chest that wouldn't loosen. When I pulled into the driveway, Kyle's truck was already there. So was Ray's. I could see shapes moving behind the front window. Voices. Lots of them. I walked up to the door and didn't knock. It was still technically my house too. I'd paid enough to earn that right. When I stepped inside, Kyle was in the hallway, arms crossed, face red. He looked like a man who'd just realized his bluff had been called. "You actually did it," he said. Not a question. An accusation. Behind him, Linda appeared in the kitchen doorway, her hands twisting a dish towel like it might save her. Ray sat in my father's chair at the table, legs stretched out, smug as ever. I didn't look at him. I looked at Linda. "Why?" I asked. My voice was calm. Too calm. She opened her mouth, closed it, then finally said, "He needed help, Tom. It was supposed to be temporary. Ray was going to pay it back." I laughed. It came out bitter and sharp. "Ray doesn't pay anything back. And you know that." Kyle stepped forward. "You're really going to destroy me over this? Over money?" I met his eyes and didn't blink. "You destroyed yourself when you forged my name. I'm just refusing to go down with you." Linda started crying. Soft, quiet tears that used to work on me. "Tom, please. We can fix this. Just withdraw the report. We'll figure it out." I shook my head. "No is a full sentence, Linda. I'm done covering for people who treat me like a checkbook." Kyle's jaw tightened. Ray stood up, slow and threatening. But I didn't move. I'd already made my choice. The fraud statement was filed. My name was protected. And for the first time in years, I wasn't folding. The next morning I drove to the VFW. Friday fish fry wasn't for 2 more days, but I knew Frank Delaney would be there. Frank was a retired attorney, 73, with a crew cut that hadn't changed since Vietnam and a way of listening that made you feel like your problem mattered. I found him in the back room playing cribbage with 2 other vets. When he saw my face, he set his cards down. "Tom," he said. "You look like you need coffee and counsel." We sat in a corner booth while I laid it all out. The shove. The chair. The forged signature. The $18,400 loan I never signed. Frank didn't interrupt. When I finished, he leaned back and folded his hands like he was weighing evidence. "You did the right thing filing that fraud report," he said. "But now you need to protect yourself. These things get ugly fast." He pulled a small notebook from his jacket and slid it across the table. "Document everything. Every call. Every text. Every threat. If they show up at your house, record it. Iowa's a one-party consent state. You don't need their permission." I nodded, throat tight. Frank's eyes softened. "Tom, I've seen men lose everything trying to keep the peace with people who don't respect them. Don't be one of them." I bought a pocket notebook that afternoon at Walgreens. That night, Linda called. I let it go to voicemail and wrote down the time, the date, and what she said. "Tom, please. Kyle's scared. Ray's furious. Can't we just talk? I didn't call back. 2 hours later, Kyle texted, "You're going to regret this, old man." I screenshotted it. Documented it. Sent it to my email. Frank was right. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about evidence. 3 weeks later, I sat in a courtroom that smelled like floor wax and old coffee. The hearing was short. Civil fraud case. Kyle wasn't being criminally charged yet, but the credit union wanted their money back and my name cleared. Linda sat 2 rows behind Kyle, hands in her lap, eyes down. Ray wasn't there. He'd made himself scarce the second the word "court" came up. The judge was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for nonsense. She asked me to explain what happened. I kept it simple. Showed her the forged signature. Showed her my real signature for comparison. Showed her the credit alert and the timeline. Then Kyle's lawyer stood up. Young guy. Cheap suit. He tried to paint me as vindictive. Said I was a stepfather angry about being disrespected and using the legal system for revenge. I didn't react. I just waited. When it was my turn again, I pulled out my phone. "Your Honor," I said, "I have doorbell camera footage from the night this started." Her eyebrow raised. "Play it." I connected my phone to the courtroom screen. The video was grainy but clear. It showed Kyle and Ray on Linda's porch 3 days after Christmas, voices low but loud enough for the mic to catch. "He's not going to do anything," Kyle said. "He never does. Mom says he always folds." Ray laughed. "Then we're good. Let him cool off. He'll cover it like he always does." The room went silent. The judge looked at Kyle. Then at me. "Mr. Walker," she said, "your affidavit stands. The debt is not your responsibility." Kyle's face went white. Linda covered her mouth. I didn't smile. I just nodded, stood, and walked out. 2 days after the hearing, Linda showed up at my house. I saw her through the window, standing on my porch with a grocery bag in her hands like some kind of peace offering. I almost didn't open the door. But I did. Old habits. She looked smaller than I remembered. Tired. Her voice was soft when she spoke. "Tom, I brought you some things. Soup. That bread you like from Hy-Vee. I wanted to say I'm sorry." I looked at the bag. Then at her. "You're sorry," I repeated. She nodded, eyes wet. "I didn't think it would go this far. I thought you'd understand. Kyle made a mistake, but he's my son. And I was your husband," I said. She flinched. "You still are." I shook my head. "No, Linda. I was maintenance. I was the guy who paid for your kitchen and kept his mouth shut and let your son treat me like help. You chose him the second he shoved me. You chose him when you didn't say a word. You chose him when you signed my name like it didn't mean anything." She started crying. Real tears this time. Messy and loud. "I didn't know what else to do, Tom. He's my son." I felt something break in me. Not anger. Sadness. The kind that sits heavy and doesn't leave. "I know he is," I said quietly. "But that doesn't mean I have to let him destroy me." I handed the bag back to her. She stood there on my porch, shaking, holding soup and apologies that didn't matter anymore. I filed for separation this morning, I said. You'll get the papers next week. Her face crumpled. I closed the door. Gently. Because some things don't need to be slammed. They just need to be finished. A week later, I drove back to Linda's house one last time. Not for her. For the chair. My father's chair. I'd called ahead. Told her I was coming. She didn't argue. When I pulled up, the house was quiet. No Kyle. No Ray. Just Linda standing in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself like she was cold. I walked past her without a word, straight to the dining room. The chair sat at the head of the table, exactly where it had always been. I ran my hand over the armrest, felt the worn wood under my palm, heard the familiar squeak when I tilted it back. It still smelled faintly like my dad's aftershave. Old Spice and cedar. I picked it up. It was heavier than I remembered. Linda watched from the hallway. Tom, she said softly. I didn't stop. I carried that chair through her kitchen, past the cabinets I'd installed, past the sink I'd replaced, and out the front door into the cold March air. I loaded it into the back of my truck and strapped it down with bungee cords. Linda stood on the porch, crying again. I didn't look back. I drove home slow, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the seat beside me like my dad was sitting there. When I got to my house, I carried the chair inside and set it by the window in my living room. The same spot it used to sit in when my dad was alive. I made coffee, strong and plain, and sat down in it. The springs creaked. The back leg squeaked. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Not a guest. Not maintenance. Just a man in his own house, in his father's chair, with his name still clean and his word still good. I leaned back and closed my eyes. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like peace. You know, I'm sharing this story not because I want sympathy, but because I know some of you are sitting in a chair that doesn't feel like yours anymore. Maybe in a house that doesn't feel like home. Maybe next to people who've made you feel like a guest in your own life. If that's you, I need you to know you're not alone. This community is built for people who've had enough. People who are done folding. So if this story hit you somewhere deep, don't just scroll past. Subscribe. Comment. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the hardest part of standing up isn't the standing. It's believing you deserve to.